Hi, this is Annie from the ADHD Minimalist, and I'm sorry I haven't made a video for a while. Actually, my family has been taking turns having influenza. So my daughter got it first, and then I was sick for a week and continued to have sinus infections, and it sounded like Donald Duck for a while. And then I broke out in an itchy red rash, and my face was itchy, and my neck and chest, and I think actually I just had my immune system wasn't really doing very good yet, and I ate something that I shouldn't have eaten, and I broke out in a red rash. So I didn't really relish filming that for you guys to see, although maybe it would have been funny. So anyway, I'm doing a lot better. Still recovering a little bit, but and my husband's been sick and got better, and my son as well, and now we're hoping that my youngest daughter doesn't get it, so that we're all well at Christmas time. Anyway, I think it's about time that my whole family and I are well for the next year, honestly, after all this sickness. But moving on, what I wanted to talk about today kind of has to do with some things that have happened the last week, but it's simplifying relationships and frustrating experiences. So, I mean, if we're gonna talk about minimalism or simplifying life, then it really should reach into all areas of life. And this is something that I sort of realized, I had a bad experience with someone. I was on the phone with them, and I'm talking on the phone, and in that moment thinking, I know how I feel about this, but how am I going to respond? And I didn't necessarily make the best choice at that point. And I think after I quit being frustrated about it, so that I could actually think about what happened and ask myself, well, what did I learn from this? Then, I mean, a lot of this stuff that I want to talk about, some of this stuff I think we know in our heads, but we kind of need to remind ourselves to use it when we're in that moment where our decision needs to be quick, and it needs to be, it really should be the best choice, the most positive choice, and the choice that is gonna show love to other people. But even like sometimes just by like taking the better road, we are being nicer to ourselves, because we don't have to deal with a fight or something that goes back and forth for a long time and before it gets resolved. And that's just a waste of time. It's a waste of your feelings, because during that time you feel yucky. And I mean, it's a waste of, I don't know, sometimes like at home, like you don't get anything done because you're gnawing on this problem, or you can't get like something that somebody said out of your head. And so I sort of told myself that I am going to try, when something like this happens, I have 24 hours to get it out of my system. However I'm going to do that. And right now I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I try to think about in these situations. And then sometimes I blow it like I did this week. But on the other hand, it allowed me to sort of like think about this process. And I think I've actually learned something from it. So hopefully next time I won't blow it again. But what I came up with was just sort of like this flow of, I don't know if you can see that, how things happen. So first there's a bad experience, and then you have initial feelings, or like your feel response to the experience. And to the feel response, I'd say don't let it take root, because often it's a negative response that we're going to get first if it's a bad experience. So don't let the negative feelings take root. And then at that point, run a self-diagnostic. Let's see here. There's probably more than 5 points. I'm going to run out of fingers. But starting over, there's a bad experience. You have initial feelings, which you don't want to let take root because mostly they're negative. Then run a self-diagnostic before you respond in any way. So you're giving yourself a chance to make a good choice and not just go with your feelings. That's sort of like sometimes, like if my kids, my kids have ADHD, and when they were smaller, they didn't want to take a bath, or they didn't want to do something that maybe it was like on our schedule to do. And then I sort of had to run a diagnostic on myself. Do I, as a parent, have the energy to manage this situation and get my child who doesn't want to take a bath today? Or do I feel like I'm too tired, and that's just going to turn into a screeching mess because my child will screech and I will get frustrated at him. And then I kind of have to pick my response and pick what kind of evening I want to have. And if I have the energy to take care of it nicely and get my child in the bath without me getting frustrated, then I can choose that option. Otherwise, I run my self-diagnostic and I can give myself permission to go the easy way and to skip the bath and to take the bath a different time on a different day, and to let everybody have a good evening. And and that's okay. Sometimes things don't always turn out the way you think, but that's sort of like how I run a self-diagnostic. I'm just kind of like thinking, how do I feel? How much energy do I have? Am I able to handle this in a good way? Like if I respond to this person, can I respond in a way that I'm not going to start some kind of long-term argument or discontent? Can I say something constructive in a way that they'll actually learn something from what I'm saying, or is that not even an option? Okay, moving on to the next point was you kind of ask yourself, who am I dealing with? So you have a bad experience, but what gave you the bad experience? Is it a person that you're dealing with, or is it that your car broke down and the repair guy can't fix it for a week? And then you kind of have to tailor your response to what is going on. If it's a family member that it's important that you keep the peace with that is causing a problem, then you'll respond differently than if it's a repairman that you're irritated with. But either way, you need to respond in a way that you would want other people to respond to you. But if we're going to talk a little bit more about tailoring your response, part of tailoring your response is, for instance, if you know a close family member, let's just say that it's your mother-in-law, and not that I've had a problem with my mother-in-law this last week. I love my mother-in-law. So, not a reflection on her, but I know this is probably a common person that many people have problems with. So, okay, there's a problem between you and your mother-in-law, and you know that your mother-in-law never takes responsibility for their part in a problem. So, at that point, you have to stop and think, okay, nothing I say is going to teach this person anything. And it's important to preserve the peace in my husband's family and in our little family, even, because my husband might be upset if I explode to his mother. So like there's all these like things about keeping the peace between different relationships. And then you kind of have to decide, am I going to open my mouth or say something, or am I going to decide to take, I don't know, I think there's even a book called Radical Responsibility. I think my husband might have read it. But I'll call this Radical Responsibility for the problem and tailor my response so I'm not causing a conflict within our little family or my big extended family. So that's kind of what I mean about tailoring your response. If you're thinking about, maybe it's the pizza guy who gave you cold pizza, or maybe it's somebody who works in your office, the cleaning person spilled something and something got ruined, or whatever. But sometimes we can just give somebody a tip and like, well, if you did it like this next time, then maybe you won't spill something on my computer or whatever it was, and the other person is fine with that. But sometimes no matter what we say, other people just they cannot learn from what we're saying, and then we're just like putting ourselves in a situation where it's going to be I say something unpleasant, they say something unpleasant, I say something unpleasant, they say something unpleasant, like this negative spiral, which isn't good for you, especially it's not good for the other person either. So tailor your response, and then you have to filter. I would ask myself, what filter am I using? Because sometimes we filter things. Actually, I would say most of the time, if we can think that somebody said something to us and we interpret it negative. And I feel like this happens a lot of the time, that we don't really allow for, maybe the person wrote the wrong word, or maybe they were trying to say something that just came out wrong in words or in a text, and we don't really give them the benefit of the doubt. We just jump directly to, oh, I'm going to put all of this through a negative filter and believe that they were saying something terrible. So ask yourself what filter you're using. Is there a way that the person meant something else or said something and they didn't really mean what they said, or what they wrote maybe was incorrect, or maybe there's another way to interpret things, or maybe there is only one negative way to interpret what they said, but it wasn't really what they were trying to say. So, I mean, like, there's a lot of different ways to look at things. So look at both sides of the coin and try to filter whatever's happened through a positive filter and not a negative filter. Then move on within 24 hours. So it's sort of a time I set myself, that because I feel like sometimes I can just get stuck in something negative and or replay something that happened, something I said and then something somebody else said, and replay it in your head a bunch of times and be like, what went wrong? Or just be frustrated because someone else did something I don't think is okay or whatever. And you don't want to let that drag on and on. So I try to give myself, I mean, hopefully it won't take 24 hours, but you have a whole day to like work out the problem. And if that means calling the person and saying you're sorry just to like make the peace, then that's what you do. But don't let it drag on and on. Then, so anyway, so you're in the back of your head, you have like, okay, we have 24 hours to take care of this. And then you move on to forgiveness, which I sort of wrote here, like all these main points of like sort of how you like run through this process if you end up in a fight with someone, or I mean just something bad happened. But then I wrote forgiveness, and then distract. They have a word in Swedish called avleda, and avleda is sort of like, and I think sometimes about children, like when they're like stuck on something and like, oh, I really want this snack, or I want that Barbie at the store, whatever, and then you sort of distract them and like start talking about something else, or you know, we can't get that Barbie today, but your birthday's coming up, or we can get this, you can pick out the cereal instead of a toy, or whatever it is. And when you do that, it's what they would say in Swedish, avleda. I'm gonna call it distract, although it's not quite as good of a word. So I choose to forgive, and then I try to distract myself with good thoughts. Like, I would say positive thoughts maybe is the right thing, because otherwise I feel like my brain just goes like, these thoughts go round and round and round, these negative thoughts, and I'm like, that is just crappy, and I don't want to go around thinking negative thoughts all the time. And like, I'll try to like think of positive things, and then I'll like go back to those negative thoughts again till I get this resolved. I think that's sort of the main thing. Like, once I feel like I get it resolved, then I can let go of all of these thoughts. But until it's resolved, I seriously have trouble just getting away from these negative thoughts that just keep coming back to. So I forgive, and then I distract myself with positive thoughts. And then if I come back to the negative thoughts, I forgive again, and I distract myself again. And what I honestly have been doing like the last few years is there's a doctor in Hawaii. I'm not sure if he's still there. He used to work in Hawaii. Dr. Hugh, I think is the right word. Dr. Hugh Len. And he was working in a prison, and when he felt like sorrow or disappointment in the inmates that were there that he was working with, as I want to say a therapist, then he would use this technique where he would think about that person and the way that they made them feel, and then say, I love you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, thank you. And so that's sort of what I do. It's much easier for me to like think about the person and say those words and distract myself sometimes than it is to think about positive thoughts. And it's much more fun to say that than to keep thinking over and over bad thoughts. And honestly, it's freeing. It's mostly for me, I think, to like just to choose those things. So it's like I'm thinking about like if that person were in front of me and I'm saying, I love you, I choose to love you, I forgive you, like I choose to forgive you, please forgive me for my part in this mess, because it takes two people to fight. What did I say? I love you, I forgive you, I love you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, thank you. And now I just kind of like lost track of things, but anyway, and then thank you at the end. Just, I mean, sort of thanking them and believing that they're going to forgive you back. So I will just kind of think about that person sometimes. And if I'm in the car, I might think about what, like, not so much what happened, but the person and a little bit how they made me feel. And then say these things several times out loud if I'm by myself in the car, or if I'm at home, maybe I'll just think it. And it sort of just helps me in a way to like forgive and let go and be able to forget and move on and not think those negative thoughts anymore. So I forgive, and then I sort of try to like, I don't know, think about things I'm thankful for, whatever it is that I can get this like negative conversation out of my head, or to stop replaying things and think, oh, why didn't I do that? And and then if that doesn't work, then I'll go back to like, I love you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, thank you, and just forgive again. and just remember that, I mean, I'm making a choice to forgive, and that it's going to make a difference, and I'm gonna get through this negative situation, and tomorrow I'm just gonna be able to forget about it and think positively. So then really, like, when I get over something, I move on to what can I learn from it. And let's see here. And like, maybe what you learned was that this person that you had an argument with, they never see things from your perspective. So maybe next time something happens, maybe then I need to keep my mouth shut because it doesn't matter what I say, they won't really understand where I'm coming from, and it just starts an argument instead of helping them learn something. So maybe every time I deal with this person, I need to have like sort of a set response in my, I don't know what you want to call it, an arsenal of things. Like, I have all these quivers and a bow, and certain people, I get out a certain thing and I use that over and over again because I know that it works with that person. So maybe you have something on your back, where you can have something in your backpack that you just pull out every time something comes up with a certain person, and then you don't have to think about it. You don't have to go to this part where you're like, your emotions are taking over and you forget to stop to make sure that those negative emotions don't take root, so that you start being negative all the time, and you forget to run a self-diagnostic, and then things can just go south from there. So sometimes it's just helpful to just know, okay, when this happens, then I'm just gonna pull this thing out of my backpack and just use that. And usually that'll work. And maybe you have to have different things in your backpack for different people, but that's possible. So it could also be maybe that, I don't know, maybe somebody in your family, like I said earlier, like, they don't take responsibility for anything. Like, I don't know, maybe something happened and they didn't hold up their end of the bargain, and they don't ever come through for you. And then maybe you need to learn that when you're thinking about what happened, like, maybe I need to plan my life differently so that I don't have to have important things in my life hanging on the fact that this other person is going to do the thing that they said they do, and then they don't do it. And then at that point, I don't have to worry about that other person not doing what I asked them to do, because I made other plans, and that frees up our relationship to be us. Like, I can have a better relationship with that person, then, because I don't have that frustration. Same with, like, maybe I let somebody borrow something and I never get it back. And this happens a bunch of times, and that's really frustrating for me. So maybe I need to realize that maybe I need to say no when this person asks to borrow things, and that will make our relationship better, because I don't have this frustration about this person never bringing it back, or bringing it back in poor condition, or whatever it is that happens. But it allows us to move on, and my relationship with that person to improve if I can learn from things that happen and adjust my life accordingly. So let's see if I can sum this up. I'm sorry if this seemed a little bit like I'm all over the place, but I'll read this list really quick. So you have a bad experience, you have initial feelings that you don't want to let take root. And at that point, you stop and you run a self-diagnostic, and you ask yourself who you're dealing with. And then you tailor your response, and you ask yourself what filter you're using, put on a positive filter, give everyone the benefit of the doubt, move on within 24 hours. And while you're trying to move on, you forgive, you distract yourself, you forgive again. And when you finally feel like you've gotten over these negative thoughts, you move on to what can I learn. And honestly, if we're going to boil this down to something that's even simpler, then you get, you pretty much get this. For every problem or argument, you have two different parties involved, because you don't usually argue with yourself. So you have an issue to resolve, and both parties have 100% responsibility to get their part of the issue resolved. It's not 50% and 50% or 40-60. The problem is that when you try to assign blame to people in an argument, it's like that's when things start to explode. The other person's like, oh, I'm not to blame, you're to blame. No, I'm not to blame, you're to blame. So it'll just go back and forth for a long time. So don't try to assign blame. Just realize that everyone has 100% responsibility to resolve the argument or the issue or whatever happened. And then you might also need to realize that some people will never take their responsibility. They won't maybe even take 10% responsibility, and they have a whole 100% assigned to them. But maybe you can be the person who takes radical responsibility and takes 200% responsibility for relationships or situations or whatever it is that happens. Maybe it's to keep peace in your working environment or whatever it is. If it's something that's going to make your life better, because you can be the one to step up and decide that you will keep the peace and take responsibility for what's going on and be the bigger person, then it's worth being the one that steps up and takes that responsibility. Then then don't let yourselves get bitter roots, because I know it can be hard to take 200% responsibility and feel like you're carrying somebody around in a relationship. I mean, maybe it's a close family member that I don't know, always asks you to borrow money, or I don't know, it could be like a bunch of different situations, and you have to be the bigger person. You also have to decide, I mean, am I going to let them borrow stuff or not, or whatever the situation is. But it's easy to get bitter sometimes, and that's one like really important thing, that not to allow yourself to get bitter. So that's where I sort of use this thing. I mean, think about the person and then say, I love you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, thank you, and choose to say those things because you're choosing to mean it. And maybe eventually, maybe you have to say it a bunch of times, but maybe eventually you will mean it. And I think if nothing else, forgiveness has like a huge, it makes a huge difference on you. And so it helps you not to get those bitter roots because of other people, things that they're not doing that they should be doing. And I get it. I know that's frustrating, but I think that we can actually step up and be a bigger person. And so anyway, I had this kind of crazy experience this week where I was standing there with the phone thinking, I know how I feel about this, but how am I going to respond? And I didn't respond in the best way. Like, I was already stressed out when it happened, and then I just chose to be more stressed instead of taking a step back. And I know sometimes, I mean, at that point I was also like on my way out the door almost as it was happening. And so sometimes it's easier to like take a deep breath and do a diagnostic on yourself. And sometimes you're just like, I'm running and I'm trying to like get 100 things with me, and it's harder to like stop and take that breath. But I mean, I encourage you to do so. Sometimes it's worth like that call saying, I'm sorry, we're late, something came up. And just take the breath first, take those 10 minutes that would take you to drive somewhere, and then make the call when you feel like you can be the person that you know you can be. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about today, was just sort of like the whole process of, I don't know, fighting or arguing or having something bad happen, and then this whole process of like negative feelings and replaying negative thoughts in your head, and like all the things that go on, or like fighting back and forth with another person verbally somehow. But all of that stuff, it steals time from us. I mean, and it makes our lives way more complicated. And so if we can find a way to put some tools in our backpack where we know, I always respond to this person in this way. And I mean, and all of our tools should be loving tools, even if they're tools that help other people learn things. And we need to do it with a loving way, because no one will ever respond nicely to you saying that, I mean, you did this terrible thing to me and you need to learn this and that, because then their balls will go up and they'll be like, oh, I didn't do that. Or, oh, I can't learn anything from you. You're being terrible. So you have to say things with love. And sometimes if you're going to teach somebody something, the best thing to do is just to hold your tongue when the thing is happening, and then come back like a few days later when you're calm and everything is blown over and say, you know what, when that happened, it would have been much easier for me if you could have done this and this instead or something, and just give somebody a tip when everybody's like on neutral ground. And that's sort of sometimes how I try to think with my kids who have ADHD, that sometimes when you're trying to discipline in the middle of like a chaos, sorry, chaos is Swedish for chaos. It's not possible because the child isn't really responsive at that point. So sometimes the best thing to do is to sort of distract, I guess would be avleda, try to get everyone to calm down, and then revisit what the issue was and what the child needs to learn maybe the next day when they're actually in a receiving mode. Because when people are in that, I don't know, maybe it's a fight and flight mode, or this like, don't assign blame to me, like I didn't do anything wrong, this defensive mode, they can't actually learn anything from you. So pick your battles, and then even if you decide that you can maybe take the easy path today, then you need to decide to pick your time and your place to come back sometimes to like teach people things so that they actually learn things and that they grow. And sometimes waiting to take the fight about, I don't know, a discipline issue or different things until a time when everybody is calm actually means that you don't have to keep revisiting that issue as many times, because it'll have like sunk in. Because sometimes when I've tried to tell my kids stuff and like they're emotionally riled up and I'm emotionally riled up, and they're like I can't learn anything from you, you're raising your voice and sounding mad, or I can't learn anything from you because blah blah blah, or that they didn't hear me at all, they just had like totally tuned out. And so then I have to like totally repeat myself again and expended a lot of emotional energy trying to get my point across, which didn't help anything. So anyway, and I don't mean that every time that you have a disciplinary issue you have to come back and talk about it tomorrow either. I'm talking about like specific times when I don't know, maybe it's a teenager and it's easier to discuss things when everybody's calm, and you don't just take them with you and talk about something in the back bedroom. Can't just like pick up your teenager and take them and have a conversation. But ADHD kids can also be sort of similar to teenagers in some way, that sometimes like a mood will just like flare up or I don't know, things, behavioral issues come up that you don't always see with other children, and sometimes it's just like you can't get around it. And just in that moment you kind of just have to like step back and like just put out fires for a little while and allow everyone to like get back to like their normal emotional self, where everybody is like doing fine. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm probably rambling here, and I'm sitting in the corner because my phone, it wasn't charged and I had only like a super short cord. Let's see if I can show you this. Oh, sorry. So anyway, so here is the phone is attached to the cord in the wall, and I'm actually using this plant to hold up my phone as I am filming for you today. And anyway, I realized that I hadn't dusted my speakers for a long time by the TV, and so anyway, not such a bad idea to come sit in the corner every once in a while to get a closer look at how well you've been doing cleaning in the outer skirts of your living room. Anyway, go check out my blog, theadhdminimalist.com, and I have some articles on there about a lot of different things that have to do with minimizing an ADHD, and how to declutter if you have ADHD, and how to declutter if you don't, and how to declutter with kids, and how to declutter with kids that have ADHD, as well as some tips for taking kids on vacation if they have ADHD, and sleep tips for kids with ADHD. There's a lot of stuff on there. So anyway, feel free to go check that out, and you can check out some of my other videos as well. I have a lot of videos about minimizing, but there's a whole list of things that you can watch, and I would love for you to leave some comments. I try to respond to all the comments on this YouTube channel, so send me a comment and I will do my best to respond as soon as possible. Bye. I hope you guys have a great day.